let's look at where we are now, and then we can work backwards from there. Well, the tariffs have been paused. Apparently, the markets are bouncing back. Can you break down for us the logic of what's going on?
I think, I don't know if I can break down the logic, because I'm not sure if there is any logic. But yeah, so we had 2nd of April, we had Liberation Day, and then 9th of April, we had Capitulation Day. Great day, best retreat ever. Well done, everyone. And like you said, there was this huge decline in the value of equities, company shares on global markets in the US, and the UK, and around the world, due to the sudden crisis of confidence in businesses deciding that their future returns are going to be impacted by these tariffs, which are not only extremely high but arrived at in a fairly arbitrary manner. I won't go into the formula unless you want me to go into the formula.
Tell us about the penguins.
Right. So I think the penguins are actually a good example of just how arbitrary the imposition of these tariffs was. Clearly, there was a lot of uncertainty right up to the point where they actually imposed them, like to what extent they were going to do it. The formula they used is very, very simple. Is dividing the country's trade surplus with the US by its exports. So it's just this kind of random arbitrary number, which coincidentally is the formula you get if you ask ChatGPT or other chatbots how to come up with a simple tariff formula. Although a lot of the chatbots, will actually say, "Don't do this; it's a terrible idea." They obviously only read the first bit. And then, so they came up with this really quite arbitrary formula that just sort of says, okay, so, Vietnam, you can get this one number based on its surplus and its exports. So we'll just trim that in half and say, here's, 46% tariff on Vietnam because they're, unfair to us in their trade. Although a lot of Americans, benefit from getting really, being able to buy cheap clothes in shops that have been made in Vietnam. But,
fake news, Will. Fake news.
Yeah. And perhaps MAGA hats or American flags. But, and then they just blanket applied this around the world to almost every country that trades with the US. Not all of them. A few notable admissions. North Korea, Belarus, Russia. They got missed off the list, perhaps for diplomatic reasons, and even there's uninhabited islands off the coast of Antarctica, home only to penguins, were slapped with these tariff barriers. Obviously, doesn't have a great deal of impact for the penguin economy, which is mostly fish based, but. The impact was incredibly serious. Biggest dive in financial markets since the pandemic. And what I think really turned it around was it wasn't just, I think Trump and his advisors were prepared for financial markets to take a dive. I think what they were also hoping was that you would get at that point what is often referred to as a flight to quality. So that is where when risk becomes a bit more frightening in financial markets, a lot of investors will move their investments from company shares, which are quite risky, to things like government bonds or other stuff like gold, these safe haven assets. And what was happening at the end of last week and early this week was that the prices of those assets were also declining because some investors, like institutional investors and hedge funds and things like that, because they needed to cash stuff in to pay for leverage for debt that they were using, they were actually selling those things as well. So they were selling off U.S. Treasury bonds when I think what the Trump administration had assumed was that lots of people were going to buy them, and that was going to make it look like, okay, the stock market didn't like the look of what they were doing, but the bond market was okay with it, and that would also have made government borrowing, which the US is doing a lot of, cheaper, and it would have had a kind of, a silver lining, but it didn't. It was just all bad as far as the markets were concerned, and that led to some extremely high predictions of recession for the US. In recent years, their economy has been the envy of the world. Their acceleration away from the pandemic has been like no other member of the G7. And then, sort of just before you had the capitulation day announcement, Goldman Sachs was saying there's a 65% chance of that economy going into recession. So I think that's probably what turned it around. But that bounce, not all of the market value has been restored. Like, it's not back to full confidence. So it's a rally rather than a restoration. Rallies in bear markets are common. It can take in a sort of bear market, in a market slump, that these things can take years to play out. So and already any sort of judgment we make now about the state of markets will be wrong by the time anyone hears it, because we're recording.
So we won't ask you for a long-term prediction about the state of US markets. If that's the economic explanation of the last 7 days, Freddie, what about the politics of it? Was it the bond market that changed Donald Trump's mind? Was this all part of the art of the deal, a genius negotiating tactic? And where are we now in terms of the politics, given that some of these tariffs have been paused for 90 days, but crucially, some of them very much have not?
Yeah, so we now know that Scott Bessent, that's the US Treasury Secretary, was getting increasingly worried over the weekend about what he termed and others termed Black Monday. There was this concern that it was going to get even worse when those markets opened on the Monday. So he was in Palm Beach with Mar-a-Lago with the president, and he knew that he needed to get a one-on-one. And he flew back on Air Force One with Trump, and he sat him down and sort of explained that he needs to shift from the idea that this is the new reality to one that this is a negotiation. We also know that J.D. Vance, the vice president, was saying that they need to be slightly more structured, which is one word for it, in laying out the tariffs and focus more on China. So there was already discontent within his top team, and they were trying to persuade him to roll back a little bit and introduce this pause. On Monday, Trump says, okay, this is a negotiation, and we've got lots of people ringing up and countries are speaking to me. And then it's only by Wednesday, however, that we get the post on Truth Social that comes out at 1:18 p.m. where he introduces this pause. Now that they've got to explain why this has happened, why on earth have they let the markets crash? Why on earth have they introduced all this uncertainty? And why did no one know whether this was a permanent situation or whether it was about getting concessions from other countries? So Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, comes out in front of the White House with Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary, and they go, the press, you didn't realize this was all part of the deal. They were chastising and admonishing the press for being so short-sighted and in not understanding that Trump knew what he was doing. They were saying this was always part of the plan. This was always part of the plan and had nothing to do with the markets, crucially. A few hours later, Trump's in front of the cameras and he goes, well, instinctively, I knew something was up, so I changed course. I could see that the markets were getting a bit queasy. I can see that they were jittery.
I think yippee was the word that he used.
Yes, yippee. Yeah, I was trying to translate it into British English for everyone. So he was quite open about the fact that, yes, it was the markets, and more specifically, it was the bond markets as well set out. So his team's credibility is yet again shot. In terms of the broader sort of politics, the Trumpian court politics, what's quite interesting is that we've seen over the past week, Trump's team split and fight about these tariffs just because they're so drastic. Elon Musk, for instance, has got into this spat with Peter Navarro, the chief tariff architect in the White House. He's the most hardline, fervent advocate for the tariff regime. They were trading insults on social media. Scott Bessent sort of tried to sit back in a sort of awkward way, sort of trying to walk back into the hedge kind of way in all of his interviews. So in the end, the upshot, I think, is that Navarro has taken a blow in terms of his authority because he was saying this is permanent, this is not a negotiation. And Scott Bessent seems to have won the day a little bit here.
Well, I think Elon Musk called Navarro, was it dumb as a sack of bricks? And
Yeah.
Navarro said that Elon Musk, Tesla doesn't make cars, it's a car assembly company. And I think they said some other things that maybe we shouldn't repeat on this podcast. And Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, her response to this, boys will be boys. Indeed.
Caroline Leavitt has this interesting thing. Whenever something happens, whenever something's leaked or whenever there's discord within the administration, she just holds up her hands and goes, well, we're the most transparent White House in history, and that's why we're having these disagreements in public, which I must say is, I think, one of the best ways to manage this situation. And it does sort of work sometimes. People go, well, that's fair enough.
She's also
it's ridiculous.
Really quite compelling. We're not going to play clips of Caroline Leavitt on this podcast, but if you listen to her answer questions, it's a sort of a mesmerising quality to hearing her just completely unflappable by anything, even when saying things that are directly contradictory. Is this actually a win politically, economically? How much damage has been done? How much credibility has the US lost as a result of this? Is this all priced in because, Trump is Trump?
I think, I think on the one hand, it's not completely incredible to say that this was all part of the plan, because a big part of the plan was written down before the election in sort of a report written by Trump's chief economic advisor, or his chair of his Council of Economic Advisors, Stephen Mirren, who wrote a paper in which he observed that very high tariff barriers would be a way to get other countries around the table to talk about what is another sort of big long-term goal of the sort of Trumpian economics, which is to devalue the dollar. Because they feel that a highly priced dollar makes their exports too expensive for other people, and that's why people in Japan don't buy American cars. It isn't. It's because people in Japan make great cars that they sell to the rest of the world. People in America make terrible, massive cars.
Well, it's also because American cars these days, they're just too big for Japanese and European streets. They don't fit in the parking spaces.
Yeah, and the same, the reason we're not eating American beef is not to do with the dollar, really. It's to do with sort of the state of American beef, and So, there is this economic worldview that sort of supports the idea that actually going in with making up these totally arbitrary numbers and going, look, we're going to absolutely trash the place, is a way of bringing people to the table, because they have talked about that in the past. But I think, the extent to which America can actually come back from that economically it should be really concerning for them, because, first of all, other countries are already having negotiations within, with each other. So Ursula von der Leyen met with had a call, with the Prime Minister of New Zealand yesterday. Obviously, the UK government is talking to India about a new trade deal. People have described to me in the past this idea of a kind of a donut-shaped economy around the US developing, where there is a new urgency to trade deals and to the investments that businesses make that accounts for the uncertainty created by American politics. And don't forget, there is also more uncertainty to come, because Trump has made promises on tariffs that he hasn't yet fulfilled. He has talked about instituting tariffs on pharmaceuticals, and he has talked about instituting tariffs on semiconductors. Those could be really, really important, firstly, in terms of, how the market sees them, because there are some very big companies involved in that have very significant values, but also in terms of inflation, particularly with regard to semiconductors, which are kind of in a lot of the stuff we buy. And if you make them more expensive, you make everything more expensive. So, and as I said earlier, the markets have not fully recovered. So it's definitely not back to normal. That Trump's sort of revolution continues, I think.
Freddie, you're in Washington. What's the mood in DC? What's the mood in Congress among Democrats, but also among Republicans to what we've seen? I mean, just to compare this to the UK's own Liz Truss quasi-Kwarteng mini budget, Conservatives were pretty freaked out by that. And that was why she had to, one reason why she had to U-turn. So how are Republicans feeling about all this?
Yeah, well, Donald Trump's grip on the Republican Party is much tighter than Liz Truss's on the Conservative Party ever was. So there is this built-in loyalty in Congress. There were Democrats saying that ultimately Congress is the only body in the United States that should be able to raise taxes. That was a key part of the founding of the country, and Trump can only do this because he's announced a national economic emergency. So people were challenging the Republicans and saying, look, you need to reclaim this power. Rand Paul, for instance, a libertarian member of Congress, he stood up and said, effectively, this is unconstitutional and we need to do that. But he was a lone voice, essentially. Mike Johnson, the speaker, the Republican speaker of the House of Representatives, has been quite clear that they're going to let Trump deliver on, as they see it, his mandate during the election, because he said that he was going to do these tariffs and they don't want to block him. It's interesting, if you look back over the past 100 or 200 years or so, the idea in part was that you can give tariff power to the president because it will prevent members of Congress focusing too much on factories or local businesses in their constituency, and it would allow a much more universal, broad, comprehensive policy to take hold. And that's we saw that during the with FDR and others, but it's almost been reversed now, and Trump's actually pursuing a tariff policy that many people would oppose. The Democrats are still in their lackluster, sort of comatose response to the election, but they are waking up a little bit. We had Cory Booker's big speech last week in the Senate.
25 hours.
25 hours, yeah. And that seems to revive some sense of urgency. Chris Murphy, the senator, has been very strong on the threats to democracy. But there are some people in the party that have actually been pro-tariff. Jared Golden, who is a member of the House of Representatives, he called for a 10% universal tariff to come in. I think it was after the election or before the election. I can't remember when, but this was one of his key policies, and he was happy to see the White House introduce that. So you got to remember that there are parts of the Democratic Party that do see tariffs as one way to reshore manufacturing, to help some of these quote unquote left behind areas, to protect the steel industry or whatever it might be. They are a very small minority, I will stress, but they are there.